Hey, North Metro Church, Trey Tankersley here, the care pastor. So about a week ago, Rob got a group of us together on Zoom to assign devotionals for the week between Palm Sunday, which was last Sunday, and Easter Sunday, which is coming up. And I was late to the Zoom meeting, and by the time I logged on, all the devotional days had been spoken for, except one, Saturday. So I got the day and the devotional assignment that no one else wanted. Yeah, even if I had been on time, I probably would have still chosen Saturday and Saturday's devotional. Now, some of you may already know this, but one of the gospel writers, John, devotes 10 of his 21 chapters to the last 8 days of Jesus' life on earth. I mean, think about that. Almost half of John's entire written account of Jesus' life covers just over 1 week. And John shares with his readers what Jesus and his followers did on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday and Wednesday of that week. We know what happened on Thursday as Jesus ate the Passover meal with his followers, went to the Mount of Olives to pray, and in the Garden of Gethsemane later that evening, he would be arrested and then shuffled around through the night to different residences in Jerusalem, ultimately landing early Friday morning at the palace of the Roman governor, where he stood before Pontius Pilate. We know what happened the rest of Friday as Jesus endured the crucifixion. We also know what happened on Sunday, Jesus' victorious resurrection. That leaves one day where we have no biblical revelation telling us what happened. And this is also the day I was assigned to create a devotional on Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath. All we can really do is conjecture about what Jesus' followers may have done on the Sabbath following Jesus' death. I would wager that this particular Saturday was the most difficult of their lives. They were most certainly still in shock from the previous day's events. Jesus' torturous death had taken them completely by surprise. This was not the way it was supposed to be. How could this have happened? Was there anything they should have done or could have done to save Jesus' life? Saturday's emotions probably included a crushing sadness, deep regret, hopeless confusion, overwhelming grief, just to name a few. I can imagine Jesus' followers sitting around with one another, much like we're doing these days, secluded, not venturing outside of their homes. We're not sure if they tried to stay together to comfort and help one another through the time, or if after their leader's execution, they all just went their own separate ways. Like I said, we have no biblical revelation that tells us. But we do have some revelation that tells us where they probably were, emotionally and spiritually speaking. Penned by Jesus' most famous ancestor, 1,500 years earlier, this psalm is the consensus pick for David's lowest point in life. Psalm 13, it goes like this: How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. So the psalmist, David in this case, feels forgotten by God, perhaps even abandoned. From David's perspective, God is hiding from him, leaving David only with his thoughts to keep him company. On his own, David is trying to figure out his next steps. The days cruelly drag David through seas of sadness and grief while his enemies defeat him at every turn. David desires answers from God, insights into the events swirling around him. Unless God comes through, all is lost for David. His enemies will win, and David's rule as king will end. Now, I have no biblical authority to back me up, But my guess is that Jesus' followers felt similarly to David, as expressed in this psalm, forgotten and abandoned by God, alone with their thoughts, alone with their many questions surrounding what happened to Jesus and what his death now meant for them. They had to feel defeated, beaten, thoroughly discouraged. Now, none of us really want to feel those sorts of negative emotions. They are certainly not popular in our culture. They are more like unwanted and unwelcome house guests, aliens to what we believe is supposed to be our normal experience. When we encounter negative emotions in ourselves and others, we often want to separate from them as quickly as possible. Some of us forbid our children to have feelings of sadness and anger, banishing them to their rooms until they can wipe away those tears and put a smile or a happy face on. When we meet people in distress, how often do we feel responsible to make them feel better by offering trite solutions or another perspective on what's happening? And when these negative emotions are our own, well, we just want them to leave as quickly as they came. Trying to get over life's setbacks as rapidly as possible seems like the Christian thing to do. We get really good at stuffing feelings, compartmentalizing them, brushing them off with strong denials of what we're really feeling. Is it any wonder we are some of the wealthiest people who have ever lived and some of the most unhappiest? Is it any wonder we forgive those who hurt us long before we've even considered and figured out what we've actually lost or in the ways that we've actually been hurt? Now, not only do we feel pain, but we add to our suffering by telling ourselves we shouldn't feel a certain way. We don't really need anyone else to invalidate our feelings and experience. We do that quite well on our own. But this wasn't the way of Jesus. On many occasions in the Gospels, you read of Jesus experiencing negative emotions like deep grief and sadness. Like when his friend Lazarus died, for instance, or when he gazed upon Jerusalem just before they would treat him like they had the other prophets before him. On the other side of the Kidron Valley that Thursday evening, among a grove of olive trees, with drops of sweat soaking his clothes in the ground upon which he stood and bowed before his Father. And it is in that prayer that Jesus prayed amongst the trees, and it's in David's psalm where our parched souls find water. David declares in the latter part of his psalm, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." And God has been good to us, especially those who know his salvation. Those of us who know the Lord's salvation, literally, Jesus' name, Yeshua, we can sing the Lord's praise. His unfailing love can be trusted, and we can feel sorrow and loss, disappointment and discouragement. Jesus certainly did. He didn't deny his emotions or move through them too quickly. He understood, I imagine, that negative emotions have a part to play in our lives. In fact, there is growth that only comes when we allow ourselves and others to experience the full range of their emotions, to name them, feel them, to allow the negative ones in particular to enlarge our souls through grief and loss. Negative emotions do not mean you're weak and that you do not have faith. In fact, quite the opposite. Experiencing negative emotions like the ones I'm sure the disciples experienced on Saturday remind us that we are not in control, that this world is not our home, that pain builds empathy for others and ourselves, that identifying with the sufferings of Jesus is part of and actually critical to maturing your faith as a follower of Jesus. And they make the victory of Jesus' resurrection that much sweeter, that much more meaningful, so that we can sing praises much more loudly to the Lord whose unfailing love and salvation has been so good to us.